10,000 مقمق اللغة النفطية الدارجة. نعم، 10,000 مقمق. ممكن الوصول إلى رقم قريب منه حسب التقديرات الحالية. ما يمكن إنتاجه للعراق سواء من الغاز المصاحب إذا تم إن شاء الله يعني إمكانية يعني إيقاف هدره وحرقه، إضافة إلى الغاز الحر في حقول كردستان وحقول الغرب مثل حقل العكاز وحقل المنصورية وحقل سيبة، ممكن الوصول لحوالي تقريبا 7,500 مقمق. يعني طبعا القدرة القصوى. ولكن وزارة النفط حسب علمي ناوية بالقيام بمناقصة لجولة تراخيص جديدة السادسة متعلقة بالمناطق الحدودية تحديدا الغازية في المناطق الغربية والشمالية كذلك، في اعتقاد أنه سيتم استكشاف كميات أكبر من الغاز، وبالتالي سيمكن للعراق أن يوفر كميات عالية من الغاز. هذا فيما يخص جزئية ما يمتلكه العراق من ثروة جزئية. كيف يمكن استغلال هذه الثروة التي حباها الله لهذا البلد العظيم؟ العراق حقيقة مثل أي بلد آخر في العالم يحتاج إلى عاملين رئيسيين من أجل النجاح في الاستثمار في هذه الثروات وتمكين شعبه حقيقة من هذه الثروات بشكل مناسب. العامل الأول هو التشريعات والقوانين. لا بد للدولة أن تضع تشريعات وقوانين التي تساعد المساهمين وتساعد المستثمرين سواء كانوا من داخل البلد أو من خارج البلد. نحن مثلا كشركة إماراتية ذو جذور عراقية بأي حال من الأحوال، ولكن نحن شركة إماراتية، أنا شخص إماراتي. إذا رغبت للقدوم إلى العراق، هذا بلدي بالدرجة الأولى، يعني أنا أنظر للعراق كبلد، لا أنظر له أنني زائر لبلد آخر. حتى ساعات أنني أستاء عندما أجدهم يضعوا لي مثلا التأشيرة على الجواز. يعني على أي حال، ما أود قوله هنا أنه عندما أتي إلى هذا البلد أريد أن أطمن أن هناك القوانين والتشريعات التي تضمن لي كمستثمر القيام بالأعمال التي أنوي القيام بها من أجل استثمار هذه الطاقة الموجودة في البلد. في اعتقادي أن هذه الجزئية تحتاج إلى عمل أكثر. نتمنى أنه إن شاء الله هذه الجزئية يمكن تلافيها مستقبلا. أنا على إيمان كامل برغبة وقدرة الحكومة الحالية في العراق بقيادة السيد محمد شيع السوداني وفريقه العامل على فعلا تصحيح هذه النقطة. العامل الآخر هو تشجيع القطاع الخاص والنظر له كمساهم، كشريك، كما ذكر الأخ أحمد، كبارتنر، شريك، وليس كخادم أو مقاول. لأنه في الحالة هذه حقيقة إذا نظر له كمقاول هو ينظر إلى مصلحة وقتية ومن ثم الاختفاء، بينما إذا نظر له كشريك سينظر إلى الجانبين، الربح والخسارة. لا يمكن فقط للمساهم أن ينظر له كمقاول. هذا في رأيي مع احترامي حقيقة لآراء التي قد لا تتفق مع هذا الرأي، لكن الشراكة دائما هي أفضل وأقصر وأضمن الطرق للنجاح في أي مشروع. إذا أتيت واستثمرت أنا مبلغ مليار أو مليارين في هذا البلد أو في أي بلد، ووجدت القوانين الضامنة لهذا الاستثمار، ووجدت أن مثلا الأمور الأخرى الساندة كموضوع مثلا الأمن وموضوع مثلا البيروقراطية ممكن تجاوزها وحلها. العامل الآخر الذي يهمني حقيقة أن شريكي في البلد سواء كانت وزارة النفط في بغداد أو وزارة الثروة الطبيعية في الإقليم أو أي جهة أخرى تنظر لي كشريك، تتعامل معي كشريك. هذه نقطة جدا مهمة في رأيك. فما أراه أن العراق يمتلك قدرات هائلة وهائلة جدا، ويمكن له الوصول بسهولة نظريا، قد ربما عمليا تحتاج إلى مجهود أكبر، لكن نظريا بسهولة إلى تحقيق أهدافه بالاكتفاء الاكتفاء إلى قدر كبير حوالي 80% من احتياجاته إلى الغاز. ويمكن حقيقة مع هذا الاكتفاء خلق آلاف فرص العمل للشباب العراقي في الشمال وفي الجنوب. ممكن حل أيضا مشاكل مجتمعية التي قد ربما الدولة تواجهها في بعض المناطق الساخنة، عندما يقوم الشريك المستثمر بالعمل في هذه المناطق وتوظيف شباب وشابات أهل المناطق هذه واستخدامهم كعامل تحفيز وعامل دعم عوضا عن يكونوا عامل حقيقة هدم وتخريب. فما نتمناه أن تكون هذه الحكومة بإذن الله تعالى على قدر الآمال في تحقيق هذه الأهداف. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you, Abdallah. Ambassador, you are ambassador of a very important country with a long history in Iraq. You engage the government in the region every day in terms of your priorities in the Middle East. How does energy factor into your engagement with the Iraqi government and the Iraqi Kurdistan region?
Andrew, thank you very much for the opportunity to engage on energy. It's clearly a central question to Iraq, and thank you to the American University for this opportunity. It's the first Sully forum I've managed to attend, I hope not the last. As you said, this question about energy security is central, frankly, to all countries. And this balance that some of the panel have been talking about between our climate goals and our energy goals is a balance that all of us have to strike. Only last month in the United Kingdom, we established a new ministry for energy security and net zero to try and work out how to bring these objectives together. And I think part of the challenge all of us face, and it definitely applies here in Iraq, is how we align those two goals at the same time. How do we make decisions that balance the short-term pressures in terms of energy security, food security, water security, with our long-term goals of inclusive growth and a decarbonised economy? And that requires a series of trade-offs and a series of very integrated, coordinated policy making. And I think that's part of the challenge Iraq faces in terms of its energy and economy transition. I would say, Iraq is incredibly dependent on the oil and gas sector. I hesitate to debate figures with the rest of the panel, but I think we see 98% of exports are oil and gas. 85% of government revenue is from the oil and gas sector, and the vast majority of employment is in the public sector dependent upon that revenue. So this isn't just about energy transition, it's about moving the whole economy of Iraq into a new space. And I very much agree with my colleague that it's about creating a private sector that can add more and complement what is happening on oil and gas. A private sector that makes the most in terms of secondary industries from oil and gas, but also moves well beyond oil and gas to mass employment sectors, to more opportunities and genuinely fresh sources of revenue. And there's a lot that will need to happen to enable that. We would prioritise sort of banking reform, financial services, and a whole load of changes to investment legislation and other measures to attract investment from overseas into Iraq. In terms of how that relates to the energy sector, as you said, Iraq has some choices to balance its engagement in energy and its plans with its climate priorities. The Prime Minister mentioned this morning the event in Basra earlier this week, but we know that Iraq will be one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world and is already the second largest producer of methane in the world and is facing acute water, food and other shortages over the coming years. And Iraq has the potential to combine some of its engagement in these space that, as I say, aligns its priorities. We know that it can take advantage of the opportunities in front of it in terms of energy. We've talked a lot about gas capture, but Iraq, I think, is flaring actually 1.7 billion cubic feet of gas, and it's at the same time already importing 1 billion cubic feet of gas from Iran. So it could save and profit from $2.5 billion a year simply by capturing its gas and stopping importing gas when it has sufficient domestic production. It has significant potential in renewables, in solar, and again, starting with the previous government and continuing in this government, there are ambitious commitments, over 12 gigawatts of projects to generate solar, but those need to move pretty quickly from discussions and proposals to concrete delivery if we're going to see the full benefits of that for Iraq. And it needs that stable platform that some of the panel have spoken about in terms of allowing investment, having both the budget law, which we hope will be agreed soon, having the hydrocarbons law, and having an investment basis that will enable the international community to come in behind that. So I want to give a chance to move to the questions, but in terms of your sort of question to me as to where does energy fit in, at the moment, I think we see a country that is heavily dependent on oil and gas. Its entire economy is based on it. It's impossible to escape that. And two of the biggest challenges it faces are around energy and economic transition moving forward. And certainly all of us in the international community really want to support Iraq with that transition. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. We're going to turn to questions, so please submit them via the QR code. I'm going to ask one just to kick us off while we get a few in the queue, and if you could give short answers. These have been rich presentations, very detailed, very analytical, but we want to try to get a number of questions in. I first want to ask about Iran. Iran is a major player here in the region. It's also a major energy player. And if there were some type of nuclear deal with Iran or not, that has an impact on the energy situation and may have an impact even here in Iraq. Let me start with Megan again quickly. If you could, I know it's hard to disentangle the energy issues from Iran from some of the political and strategic issues, but if you could give your kind of take on what you see the impact of a nuclear deal, not a nuclear deal with regard to Iran's oil and gas capabilities, including here in Iraq.
Thank you, Andrew. So I see really two parts of this question. Is one, would a nuclear deal have, what kind of impact would it have? And then implicit in that, but I think equally or maybe even more important, is just how likely is such a deal in the short term? So I think the first part can be dealt with quite quickly in the sense that obviously there would be a significant impact in the sense that if Iran were not just able to, but also encouraged to bring its oil and gas into the global markets, that would be, depending on your perspective, but that would certainly have an impact on the price and have an impact on the flows of energy. The actual fact is that Iran's oil has been flowing, even though it is sanctioned by the United States. The United States and other countries have not really implemented the sanctions as much as they might have been implemented. So that's one thing to watch, actually, is could things move in the other direction where the Biden administration and other governments decide, for whatever reason, that they're going to put more focus on implementing the sanctions that have been put in place. The second part of the question about how likely is some kind of deal. I don't like to be a glass half full person, since we've been using that terminology a bit. It's hard from an American perspective to see how the current situation would be conducive to a successful deal right now. I don't want to, diminish the fact that the deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran hopefully will bring down tensions in the region and could change some dynamics in a fundamental way. So I think there's certainly that opportunity. But when I think about some of the impediments to a deal, they're in Tehran and they're in Washington, D.C., and they have to do with domestic politics. And I think many of those dynamics have not changed. So it is a little difficult for me to see how this current environment ends up in producing a nuclear accord of some type, particularly when the real focus, I think, in Washington has shifted to just the extremely high levels of enrichment of uranium that the Iranians are currently doing. The one thing I would say, and I don't want to leave people with the impression, actually my feeling is that the U.S. foreign policy towards Iran has primarily been in spite of oil rather than because of oil. But certainly when I look at global markets, I can see a potential in the coming year when a number of factors could conspire to produce a higher oil price. I know the oil price is coming down a little bit right now, but the combination of Chinese demand coming back on the market, big question marks around continued levels of Russian production, and very kind of suboptimal levels, or not a lot of investment in oil, new oil around the world could create upward pressure on the price. And that always, gets people talking about opportunities to find some kind of diplomatic understanding with Iran and other countries that might be able to bring more oil to market. But right now, I'm not particularly optimistic.
Let me ask His Excellency Deputy Minister Ashahar on this point. Is Iraq having success, and do you think it's possible to reduce imports of Iranian gas? And how satisfied are you at this point with the steps toward integration with some of the Gulf states to provide gas alternative? And again, we only have 5 minutes, and I'd like to get some I know it's a big question, but a short answer, but I wanted to get your take on this.
Gas industry is more complicated than oil industry, as you know. Of course, we have a potential reservoir to produce gas from free gas geological formations in western of Iraq, and it is good to produce more gas for exporting gas. First of all, we should matching our demand domestically. Ministry of Electricity ask for more gas and more, and electricity power is very important to rebuild Iraq and to operate our factories and even for other purposes, activities in Iraq. And gas also, it's important for our vision to establish a petrochemical industry in Iraq, which could provide a good opportunity for another industries in Iraq. It's like a gate for other industries in Iraq. So if we reach, as my colleagues say, 10 or 8 billion scf per day, there is a high potential to export gas. Now we're thinking to export gas by a new method from Basra Gas Company, mostly LPG and condensate, and we try to minimize the degrees less than and less, but as you know, it needs investment until we reach LNG plants in Iraq. For pipeline, if we have a target to reach Europe countries by gas, and there is really a good demand there. So for geopolitical side, it is not very optimistic picture nowadays. We hope, inshallah, it goes better day by day, and to thinking about export by pipeline to Mediterranean Sea countries, to Italy, Greece, or other countries in Europe, and join a network in Europe. If we achieve that, of course, that need a lot of money as investment in gas industry. We hope, and our target to make this gas good for Iraq, for Iraqi people, good for prosperity, and to develop gas sector and other sectors, as I mentioned, other industries. So it is a big challenge, but it seems for me, it's a quite good potential future for Iraq to reach such level of gas industry.
I have a question here, and again, we've only got about 2 minutes left. Excellency Deputy Minister Ahmed Mufti, there was a further question on the KRG gas resources, what is kind of your message to those who are looking to invest in this sector in Iraq, picking up on some of the things that Mr. Al-Qadi said?
Yes. We cannot have a paradox of policy, okay? Let's talk about Iraq in general, and then I will comment 1 minute on Kurdistan. You cannot import gas and have export ambitions. You cannot have a super high demand, because we are public servants, we want to serve people. 24-hour electricity is a basic right. To give them that, we need to produce 10 billion cubic feet, 10 BCF of gas. Today we produce only 2. So there's a gap of 8 BCF. But this is not so pessimistic. There are resources, there are willingness, and I think it's all about how efficient the policymakers can manage such a portfolio. Kurdistan's gas is increased in the last 2-3 years. Actually, we need to thank, there is a village in Kurdistan called Qadir Karam. All this electricity is coming from the gas from Qadir Karam. And Qadir Karam in the 80s, I think, was under Anfal campaign, so there was only one person left during the Saddam's regime. My personal opinion, gas is first service, is domestic demand. Today we sit here 10 kilometers away, 3,000 metric tons of HFO is on daily basis is burned. God knows how many CO2s goes to the
احنا ندافع عن حق تقرير المصير، فإذا المرأة تحب تكون محجبة على راسي، وإذا تحب تكون غير محجبة على راسي.
اكو اشياء تفرضها عليك المهنة، واكو اشياء يفرضها عليك الشرع ويفرضها عليك الدين.
قضاء سلطة تعلو على سلطة.